Right, so we can take questions or not. If not, we're just going to have a chit chat. Or people can talk among themselves, ask these other questions. This is a pretty unstructured period in our mind, and we hope to do the same thing at the end of the day after the panels. So if no one's feeling talkative, there might be still coffee. Yeah.
I'd like to hear more from all of you about kind of how do we come up with more standardized tools across different organizations. It feels like lots of organizations are making their own tools or making their own checklists about, how do we de-identify data, or what are the standards for computational reproducibility or any of that. And so I'm just kind of curious what efforts you think need to be made or already happening to come up with, basically, stop creating kind of parallel processes and think about how we can kind of come to more of an agreement or just a bit shared definitions.
I think today is actually one of the one thing that we are trying to do. So one of the reasons we decided to come together is because we realized we'd been working in parallel, often together, but not always. So this is kind of like a first step to getting this discussion started.
Yeah, I'd say at least for JPAL, IPA is our sister organization, literally and metaphorically, and we have monthly chats with them, with Hasina mostly actually, and we do share a lot of the same kind of affiliated researchers, same with SIGA, which BITS is part of. So having 3IE and IM Analytics join in, I think would also be great, and other organizations that aren't here.
We've been trying to create like a network in India. So I'm based out of New Delhi, so we've had like an event last year where we spoke about open data, ethics, and so it is growing in interest. And going forward, I think we are expecting more interest. So we'll have future events, and there is some local interest. So I think we can get something out there. Yeah, and like partnering with JPAL and BITS would be great.
Yeah, no, I think something we've learned is that it's very hard to reach researchers directly on this one. And so, as we mentioned, we spend a lot of time working with RAs. Our approach has pretty much been to produce these tools that make their work a lot easier and then build into it kind of secret automatic documentation and stuff. But, right, it works, right? It's just like, hey, this will save you 3 days and also create the document that you need. Okay, I can do that. So part of it has been kind of like almost bribing people with the idea that this isn't, because we hear a lot at first from some researchers, oh, why are you telling me to do this? Why are you telling me to do that? I don't have time for this. I don't have funding for this part. And so kind of getting over that kind of perceived burden and just being like, no, actually, if you do the things that are in our checklist, your work will actually be a lot easier, both now and down the line. So emphasis on the now.
I have a question on that line, and I guess it's mainly for Kistler, because I think you have a structure that's more similar to ours in terms of, and yeah, I guess Katie at BITS as well. So one of the issues we find is that even though we offer tools, the take-up is very low. Like, this is here, this is free, and I was thinking in particular for the data publication, which is like preparing data for that, which is something that we tried offering and didn't necessarily take off. So in that sense, Ben talked a little bit about what our strategy is, which is mostly focusing on RAs and people who are doing the day-to-day of the data work. But what is your experience with reaching out to researchers and PIs?
I can go first. We also did have low take-up of these free services, the data publication and also the pre-publication replications, although maybe that was just kind of like a timeline type issue that not everyone was publishing their data around the time that we were offering it. We're still offering the data publication, but one of the things that we use across all of these initiatives is that because we do fund some projects, we will make it a requirement to register, to publish your data. So for those affiliates who are receiving funding from JPAL, because we do require them to publish their data within 18 months, we also offer this free service with an RA to help them clean and curate their data sets. So that kind of drives a little bit of the demand just by making that a requirement, but that is something that we also struggled with the low demand.
I think the services that we provide are a little different, but when I'm thinking about this new Acre project and trying to get people to upload the materials from reproductions, I think we're hoping to kind of leverage what work is already being done, but incentivize so graduate students are doing this, give them incentives to actually make their work public, and I think that theme runs across a lot of the work we do. So I mentioned the registered reports pilot at the Journal of Development Economics earlier. Take-up was a lot higher than we actually expected it would be, and I think that was probably because people were looking for a way to publish null findings, and all of a sudden here it was. So kind of figuring out what the incentives are and tapping into those, I think, has been helpful.
Is there any more answers? Is there room for another question now, or was there any more answers to this?
Yeah.
So we consider, and we're discussing a lot in 3IE, and we had discussions with SIGA, to the issue of credible IEs should include cost effectiveness. And so I was wondering, in terms of those data, what's happening in that area, and maybe particularly to SIGA, if you could talk to your experience on that.
Yeah, so that's a new initiative that we've started in the last year. I think you've probably been speaking with Liz Brown, who is trying to get it off the ground. So I think right now she's doing a lot of scoping with organizations, trying to understand what's already being done. It seems like not a lot of data is actually being collected. But I've been talking to her to see if she can maybe use the kind of BITS model of building momentum in order to change the way research is done. But it's still pretty nascent. I don't know
I think there was a good question or comment earlier on the amount of time invested in doing some of these processes, like either actual reproducibility, actual reproductions or replications, or just the amount of time that's required for someone to kind of add these components onto their project, which is something that, again, we get pushed back a lot on, is like, oh, this is going to take a lot of time to do now, which is why we started building it in earlier and earlier in the process. I was just curious if anyone had experience or kind of some secret hacks that PIs hate these 10 things you can do to make them do their work well. Anything on that? Because that's been, again, something that we get a lot of pushback. Hey, there's no funding for me to make my data clean and de-identified or whatever.
I guess we got a lot of pushback because we had retrospectively launched the policy, and so a lot of the grantees did not fall at that time. It did not. It wasn't in their contracts, basically. So, I mean, we have these numbers where we are saying that it takes about 3 hours to do the replication. So we go back to them. We had asked them, but yeah, I mean, that's an issue. I don't know if we can get over that. But we have credible numbers now, and I think going forward as well, we'll have more information because we're moving into more different kinds of codes and things. So, yeah.
One question.
Because of the lack of transparency with some studies, I think it's very difficult as well to find or to do the replicability of meta-analysis. have any thoughts about that, because it's difficult to compile some previous research and try to have like an analysis of any other impact evaluations. And I don't know if you have any policy to do meta-analysis as well. Did I clarify or the question?
It's not something that DIME really works on, so I don't have anything on meta-analysis.
I can take so in 3IE we work on systematic reviews, and as part of the follow-up to our research transparency policy that we introduced last year, we're now looking into, as part of the approval process, etc., for systematic reviews, to also look at the reproducibility of the meta-analysis in the cases where the systematic reviews actually lend themselves to a meta-analysis. But it hasn't been done in the past in the camp of collaboration, so which is where most of the systematic reviews in our field are housed. So that will be a sort of the next
level.
Next level. Yeah. But I think definitely similarly to at the individual study level, similarly we should hold the same sort of standards at the systematic review level.
A question around kind of the difficulties associated with moving from raw data to analytic data, especially around PII, personally identifiable information. And basically, I wanted to know if you have any protocols in place or experience around, given that something has sensitive information, how much can be shared after that? And so it's two-part. That's the first one. And the second one is, are there any procedures to guide researchers to access the instructions of who to contact, how much does it cost, where is this data hosted, in case they want to go through the trouble of accessing the sensitive data?
So we have I have two answers to that question. The first is that the World Bank has the microdata hub. So we actually have a separate team that's responsible for that, which is not part of DIME. I think they sit in the data group, I believe, yeah. And so they do a lot of support to researchers because most of our researchers are required to release most of their data. So that's the first answer, the stuff that we collect, that we own, that we are responsible for. Easy enough, right? We have a process for that, and if it's restricted, they can either embargo it or list on that thing. It just has to be cataloged. The data doesn't have to necessarily be there, but it has to say how to get it. So that's the answer for anything that we own. The harder answer is for anything we don't own, and it's something that's actually come to our attention, as I think was mentioned in one of the other presentations, is that we realized a lot of researchers had written contracts with governments or clients or third-party data collectors that they didn't own the data. Or hadn't written into the consent terms for data collection. And these obviously become immediately a lot harder. So I think something that we're working on in our survey team is kind of developing these guidelines up front before things go to field, standard language for contracts with clients and contractors. But that's something that also just really came onto our radar in a big way. Because once we own it, we have pretty solid policies for dealing with it. But we found that in many cases we don't have that ownership, and I don't want to extend that to European or GDPR type stuff because that's not been a big issue for us yet. Most of our stuff isn't passing through that jurisdiction at this point, but it could become an issue.
Kind of a totally new question about the consent statements that Shaik brought up. I think that's a really, really important part of this and super difficult. So my background is in a lot of sensitive fields, like where we have to ask questions about political affiliation, or we're working with vulnerable populations, people involved in the justice system, children. But we still want to get the information and we still want to do the research. Do you guys have any tips on the kinds of consent statements that don't scare people away but that are ethical, letting them know that the data will be public?
So I think ICPSR has some guidelines, and I was mentioning about QDR, Qualitative Data Repository. They have certain like default statements that you can make, which you can include in your consent text, which makes it eligible for open publication, basically. Yeah, those two resources would be where you should look at.
Just to make a point to follow up on that, this is something that Hasina was mentioning, is that because IPA has our own IRB, when we made the decision to have the same team both manage the IRB and do research transparency, it's Hasina and her team, and that falls under my area as well. That allowed, that was really useful within our organization. If others have the same opportunity to sort of marry those functions, it really forces you to strike that balance between sort of making data, free and transparent while also protecting data. And so now we've streamlined our IRB procedures around reviewing data privacy claims and in the IRB application, as well as providing really focused guidance, because it's literally the same people who then turn around and do the PII, searching for PII and de-identifying data.
Maria or Florence, do we use their IRB? The bank doesn't have an IRB, in case anybody wasn't aware of that fact, for reasons. But so, I don't know, do we use them or do we use someone else?
It's very decentralized. So typically we use IRBs from, co-PIs, universities, or IPA. This is basically the practice. And sometimes we have in-country IRBs that we have to clear in order to get a research visa. So typically we'll do both in those cases. But it's right. The bank research, research at the bank doesn't require IRBs. So we do at DIME. But.
Hi, Denai Ramis from Social Impact. Like IPA, the comment that we just had, we have our own internal IRB, and we've folded in research transparency efforts into the IRB as well. So I sit on the IRB and I review. I'm one of several of the team of IRB reviewers who reviews any data set that's going to be sent externally for publication. And because we do a lot of work with US government, we do have ownership questions that come up almost on every single evaluation. So we added a question to our IRB application about the contract terms, if data will have to be published later on. And then after the study, regardless of whether it went through IRB review, if the data is being published, then we also get the data set to review. And it's pretty crazy how often we get people with the best of intentions violating their own consent form or accidentally keeping PII inside the data set. So it's been a really important process for us to fold that back into our IRB function as well.
Thank you. There seems to be an assumption here that once you strip the PII out of a data set, it's not re-identifiable. And I wanted to know if you could just discuss that.
We have a panel on that with people who seriously know what they're talking about this afternoon. Broadly.
And I'm on that panel, but I would like you to discuss that too.
Right, exactly. So I was hoping to kind of kick that back to you. No, we had an internal presentation here a couple of weeks ago where we've looked at new software tools that are designed to mathematically guarantee, certain levels of re-identifiability based on the uniqueness of characteristics that are left in the data and those that are stripped out. So certainly just removing directly identifying information is a bare minimum, but we're not 100% there yet, as you might have noticed. So no, re-identifiability is difficult, especially in situations like Franz mentioned, where we're working in one village, in one place that has one project that's visible, from space or was covered in the New York Times or whatever. People are going to figure out who that is. I have no idea how to adjust that. We don't have anything for to go beyond the kind of statistical components that we have now, which clearly is not always enough in these contexts.
Just a follow up on this. When you mentioned that you had the identification tools for Python, R, and Stata, are those open source? Are other groups using it, or only you use them?
So at least the ones with JPL and IPA, the PII scanners in Stata are in Python. They're on GitHub. So if you have a GitHub account, you can collaborate with the scripts. And we do have some information on what combinations the script looks for. So it'd be great if other people would also take a look to see if there's any type of combinations that we're missing. Because we do come across a lot of data sets where the PIs don't know that maybe these two variables can help you identify. And so maybe kind of having more information on the GitHub of the type of variables that are searching. But then we also have a disclaimer saying, don't use this as kind of your one-stop shop. Like, you should also double check with human eyes as well.
I was just going to reply for you. So the DEC data group here at the bank has also a tool for R, and it's an R package. So yeah, it's open access, and the code is there.
Yeah, that one. It's called.
That would be one interesting thing to standardize, as we were talking about.
Yeah, no. So this one's called SDC Micro, and like I mentioned, it scans the whole data set for like uniqueness among all of the attributes and suggests which ones can be removed with the least information loss to increase the uniqueness of the observations. You still have to obviously find like directly identifying stuff yourself, but it helps you in that respect. And I think it also has a non-R interface so I think it has a direct GUI dashboard so you can use it without knowing R. One thing that I would want to say, at this point is that I'd love to see more citation of software tools, not least because we have several. But a lot of them are super useful, and it's be important to say, okay, when you clean this up, like what exactly did you do? So that stuff, the code and kind of metadata from those is increasingly available from these tools and can be cited and can be posted. I don't know how that integrates with some of the data storage and publication options that are out there, but I think that would be nice and not that hard, right? You write down every paper you read. It's not hard to write down what you actually use to do this stuff. With that, we have just time for one more comment from anyone, and otherwise we have 15, 20 minutes to pick up lunch, and if people can make sure to be back here at 12:15, we'll kick off with our keynote. If you have any questions in the meantime, just come find me. I'll be milling around, or anybody else who looks knowledgeable or important. They'll probably just tell you to find me. But these people, and we're all happy to help. All right, thanks so much.